You deliver what you think is an organized presentation. In your mind, you can clearly see that you have main points supporting your central idea or thesis statement, and you know what you're saying. Unfortunately, your audience can't see the organization in your head. They just hear the words. And also, unfortunately, many times they get completely lost in the speech. Unlike a written presentation, your audience can't look forward or backwards to figure out where you are going or where you have been. That's why speakers must build redundancy into their speeches. Since we can't see your organization, you must help us out with both your words and your voice. You need to give us signposts. And that's what this video is about, making it easy for your audience to follow your presentation. This video will focus on some key terms, as well as types of signposts and when to use signposts. Let's start with some key terms that often confuse many students, beginning with the speech purpose. There are three general speech purposes: to inform, to persuade, or to entertain. And they're called general speech purposes for a reason. Those are very general and not specific to the speech. That would be the specific speech purpose: to inform my audience about exercises that can be done at home, or to persuade my audience to exercise at home, or to entertain my audience with stories about my exercise experiences. That brings us to the thesis statement, also called the central idea. This is your main point or your argument in your speech. All speeches should develop an argument. If you're introducing yourself, your argument might be that you're an interesting person, or that books have been an important part of your life, and so on. The rest of your speech would then support that point, that main argument. In a persuasive speech, it might be that we don't exercise enough, and that we can address that problem by exercising at home. It is usually one single sentence. It may not be explicitly stated, but can be woven in with a creative introduction. For example, according to a 2013 report from the Centers for Disease Control, nearly 80% of adult Americans do not get the recommended amounts of exercise each week. Many of us want to exercise, but going to the gym is not only expensive, it may also be very inconvenient. A gym membership, however, is not the only way you can get your exercise in. There are many ways you can get your heart rate up and your weight down, all in the comfort of your own home. If you were listening to this, you probably figured out the thesis or the central idea. The argument is that there are several exercises that people can do at home. Notice that this is not explicitly stated in the introduction, but you get the feeling from it. Also notice that the specific purpose focuses on audience behavior, while the thesis statement focuses on the content of the speech. And that leads us to signposts. Outside of a speech situation, signposts are thought of as written signs that give you the indication or a direction. Next town 50 miles ahead, right turn ahead, or this way to the group fitness room. In a speech, however, a signpost is a verbal statement used to orient the audience, telling them where you are going, where you have been, what's coming up next, how a point fits within the presentation, and so on. Signposts have been called the glue that holds the speech together, making it a unified, cohesive presentation that the audience can easily follow. Just as there are different types of glue, there are different types of signposts. And as there are different types of brands, there may be different names for the types of signposts. A speech, or essay for that matter, is set up so that the audience gets the thesis, and remember that's the main claim or argument, early in the speech's introduction. The speech then is organized into points that will develop or support that thesis, and then the thesis is reiterated at the end in the conclusion. Notice that nothing here is connected. It's very disjointed. You need some glue in order to connect everything together to make it a much more cohesive presentation. With that in mind, we will start first with the initial preview and the final summary. Way back in 356 BC, Aristotle advised speakers to use the triptych, which said, tell your audience what you will tell them, and then tell them what you told them. In our terms, we're talking about the initial preview statement, the body of the speech, and the final summary statement. Oftentimes we eliminate the words initial and final, just calling them the preview and summary statements. The preview statement comes right at the end of the introduction and before the first point. You may hear the preview statement referred to as the speech's blueprint or roadmap. It specifically tells the audience the main points of the speech. Assume you're doing an informative speech on exercises you can do at home, with your main points being exercises that can be done without equipment. those that can be done with simple equipment, and others that can be done with multi-purpose equipment. Your preview statement could be, today we will cover some exercises you can do that don't require any equipment, some that you can do with simple equipment like barbells, and finally, some that you can do with the use of multi-purpose equipment. It tells the audience the points you are planning to cover in the speech in the order that you plan to cover them. The final summary is placed after the final point. It restates the main ideas, reminding the audience what you have covered in the speech. It is essentially the flip side of the preview statement. Again, it is specific to the main points of the speech. Now you can do some exercises that don't require any equipment, some with simple equipment, and some with multi-purpose equipment. Of course, you can be a little more creative with the wording and perhaps a little less specific, but think of it as your audience wants to take notes, writing down the speech's main points before you start speaking so they can check off that you actually covered them. Even if you have signposts included in your speech, your audience still may not recognize them as signposts. You must pay attention to your nonverbals, such as your tone of voice, rate of speed, pausing, and even your use of body movement. Remember, your audience can't see the signposts, they have to sound like signposts. Let's turn next to transitions. They help the audience see the connection between points, which is why they may sometimes be called connectors. There are transitions between the main points as well as sometimes within main points. And you may need to have a transition from your initial preview to your first point to smoothly get us into the speech. Just as we said earlier with the initial preview and summary statement, transitions may be communicated verbally or non-verbally, but we're going to concentrate on verbal transitions. Transitions indicate that the speaker has finished one part and is moving on to the next. One way is to use repetition, such as a keyword or a synonym that refers back to a keyword. In your speech on exercise, you might have used the word simple in your first point. To move to your second point, you could say, beyond these simple exercises, you can, and you're repeating the word simple. Or simple could be replaced with the synonym basics, as in moving beyond the basics. Another method is to use transitional words or phrases, such as now we can, or additionally, or there is one more. Notice that in this case, I use the transitional phrase another method to introduce this second point. Enumeration is counting or putting things in order. For example, you may say second, next, or finally. An excellent technique, especially to connect main points, is to use the reflect back and look forward method. Remind us of what has been covered and then set us up for the next point, such as, now that you know what types of exercise you can do with no equipment, reflecting back, let's talk about how adding in a few pieces of equipment can enhance your home exercise regime, looking forward. And some of these can be done in the form of a question, like, what's next? Or, knowing the basics is helpful, but can adding in a few simple pieces of equipment really make a difference? That takes us to the last type of signposts, which are internal previews and summaries. Remember, we've already talked about the initial preview and final summary. They occur at the beginning and at the end of the presentation, which are external or outside the body of the speech. But you can also include previews and summaries within your main points, internal to the body of the speech. At the beginning of your first point, you might say, let's focus on 3 simple exercises you can easily do without equipment, providing an internal preview. Or at the end of your first point, you might say 3 basic exercises, sit-ups, squats, and mountain climbers, all easily able to be done at home. So there you have it. Some key terms, types of signposts, and where to put them. And by now you should be able to recognize that I just gave you a final summary. There are lots of places where you can add redundancy in your speech, but be careful of overusing signposts. Too few and your audience may be lost, but too many and your audience will be bored. Quiz time. Where can signposts be used in a speech? What is the difference between a thesis statement and a preview statement? And finally, what are some ways that you can transition between your points? Your job as a speaker is to communicate your message effectively. If your audience can't follow your argument, then they won't be able to get your message.